Beware. These 50 strangest unsolved mysteries of all time are seriously spooky. Everyone loves a good mystery. But what about those good unsolved mysteries that don't have that satisfying ending, like Scooby-Doo pulling off the mask of the culprit, and are just downright spooky? These unsolved cases, like the JonBenét Ramsey mystery and the murders of Jack the Ripper, have rocked our history books for the better part of a century. All of these cases are baffling, strange, creepy, and frustratingly unsolved. Get ready to have the hair on the back of your neck stand up when you read this roundup of the strangest unsolved mysteries of our time. Beware. Some of these unsolved mysteries contain graphic, violent content and should be read with discretion. 50 Strangest Unsolved Mysteries Part 1. 1. The body on Somerton Beach. In December 1948, a body was found on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. The body was a man who was dressed impeccably in a suit with polished shoes, and his head was slumped against a wall. Authorities thought the cause of death was heart failure or more likely poisoning, but no trace of poison was found in the autopsy. There wasn't a wallet or any type of identification on the man, and all the tags from his clothing were cut out. The fingerprints that the authorities took of him were also unidentifiable. They even put a photo of the body in the newspapers, and still, no one could identify who the man was. 4 months later, after the body was found, detectives found a hidden pocket that was sewn on the inside of his trousers. Inside the pocket was a rolled-up piece of paper from a rare book called the Rubaiyat. The piece of paper had the words, "Tamam Shud," on it, which means, "It has ended." After months of looking for the exact book, authorities decide to bury the Somerton man without identification. Although a cast was taken of the bust and he was embalmed to preserve him. 8 months later, a man walked into the police station. He claimed that just after the body was found, he found a copy of the Rubaiyat in the back of his car that he kept parked near Somerton Beach. He thought nothing of it until he read about the search in a newspaper article. Sure enough, the book had a part of the final page that was torn, and it matched the piece of paper that was found in the Somerton man's trousers. Inside the book were a phone number and some sort of strange code. The phone number led the authorities to a woman named Jessica Thompson who lived nearby. During her interview, she was very evasive and even claimed she was going to faint when she saw the bust of the Somerton man, but denied knowing him. However, she said she did sell the book to a man named Alfred Boxall. Unfortunately, Alfred Boxall was still very much alive at the time and still had the copy of the Rubaiyat that Jessica had sold him. The code that was found ended up being even more unhelpful, and as of today, it has still yet to be cracked. To this day, the man on Somerton Beach has yet to be identified. 2. The strange disappearance of D.B. Cooper. On Wednesday, November 24, 1971, a man identified as Daniel Cooper bought a $20 one-way ticket on Northwest Airlines on Flight 305 from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Cooper was described as being in his mid-40s, wearing a business suit, an overcoat, brown shoes, a white shirt, and a black tie. He also carried a briefcase and a brown paper bag. Before the flight took off, he ordered a bourbon and soda from a flight attendant. After the plane was airborne, Cooper handed the flight attendant a note. At first, she just put it in her pocket without looking at it, but then Cooper told her, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." Cooper then told her the bomb was in his briefcase and asked her to sit next to him. He opened the briefcase to reveal red-colored sticks, surrounded by an array of wires. Cooper told the flight attendant to write down everything he was saying and then take it to the captain. The note said, "I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash, exclusively in $20 bills, put in a knapsack. I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff or I'll do the job." FBI agents assembled the ransom money from several Seattle area banks, and Seattle police obtained the parachutes from a local skydiving school. When Cooper claimed his demands were met, he allowed all passengers and some of the crew to exit the airplane. Cooper told the remaining crew to refuel the plane and chart a course for Mexico City while staying below 10,000 feet. During the flight, Cooper put on a pair of dark wraparound sunglasses which would make it into the official sketch and become famous to anyone investigating the case. A little after 8 p.m. and somewhere in between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, Cooper jumped out of the rear door of the plane with 2 of the parachutes and the money. He was never seen again. Despite an expansive manhunt and over 45 years of searching, no conclusions have been made as to the man's identity or his fate after he jumped. It is called one of the greatest cold cases in FBI and U.S. history. 3. The Black Dahlia Murder. On January 15, 1947, the remains of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, a.k.a. the Black Dahlia, were found on the block of 3800 South Norton Avenue in Los Angeles. The body was cut in half and so pale and drained of blood that the woman who found the body mistook it for a mannequin at first. The body was cut with surgical precision, leaving no trauma to internal organs and bones. Her face was also cut from her mouth to ears, leaving an eerie permanent smile. There was no blood on the ground, making it believed that the body was moved after she had been murdered. 9 days after she was discovered, an envelope was sent to the Examiner addressed by using individual cut and pasted letters from magazines and newspapers. It read, "The Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." As promised, the envelope contained Short's social security card, birth certificate, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with pages missing and the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. Gasoline was used to clean the objects, removing the fingerprints. On March 14, a suicide note scrawled in pencil on a bit of paper was found tucked in a shoe in a pile of men's clothing by the ocean's edge at the foot of Breeze Avenue in Venice. The note read, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that, or this. Sorry, Mary." The pile of clothing was first seen by the beach caretaker, who reported the discovery to the lifeguard captain, John Dillon. Dillon immediately notified the West Los Angeles police station. The clothes included a coat and trousers of blue herringbone tweed, a brown and white shirt, white jockey shorts, tan socks, and tan moccasin shoes, about size 8. However, the clothes gave no clue about the identity of their owner. Although many suspects were named, no authorities were able to identify the Black Dahlia's killer, and the mystery has gone unsolved for over 70 years. 4. Wall Street bombing of 1920. During the lunch rush on Wall Street on a September day in 1920, a nondescript man driving a cart pressed an old horse forward in front of the U.S. Assay Office, across from the J.P. Morgan building. He stopped his cart, got down, and immediately disappeared into the crowd. Minutes later, the cart exploded into a hail of metal fragments, immediately killing more than 30 people and injuring 300. The aftermath was horrific, and the death toll rose as the day wore on and more victims succumbed to their injuries. In the beginning, it wasn't obvious that the explosion was an intentional act of terrorism, it was viewed as simply an accident. Maintenance crews cleaned up the damage overnight, plus throwing away any physical evidence would be crucial to identifying the perpetrator. By the next morning, Wall Street was back in business. Conspiracy theories were abundant, but the New York Police and Fire Departments, the Bureau of Investigation, the FBI's predecessor, and the U.S. Secret Service were on the job to find out the truth. Each lead was actively pursued, and the Bureau interviewed hundreds of people who had been around that area before, during, and after the attack, but collected very little information. The few recollections of the driver and wagon were vague and useless. The NYPD was able to reconstruct the bomb and its fuse mechanism, but there was much debate about the nature of the explosive. However, the most promising lead had actually come prior to the explosion. A mailman had found 4 crudely spelled and printed flyers in the Wall Street area from a group calling itself the American Anarchist Fighters, that demanded the release of political prisoners. The letters seemed similar to ones used the previous year in 2 bombing campaigns which were led by Italian anarchists. The Bureau investigated up and down the East Coast, to trace the printing of these flyers, but they were unsuccessful. Based on bomb attacks over the previous decade, the Bureau initially suspected followers of the Italian anarchist Luigi Galleani had committed the crime. But the case couldn't be proved, and Galleani had already fled the country. Over the next 3 years, hot leads turned cold and promising trails turned into dead ends. In the end, the bombers were not identified. 5. The disturbing death of Elisa Lam. On January 26, 2013, 21-year-old Canadian tourist Elisa Lam checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. When she never checked out on February 1, nor had any contact with her parents, the Los Angeles Police Department was contacted. On February 19, 18 days from the last time she was seen, Lam's body was found floating and naked in a water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel. Her body was found due to hotel guests complaining about the hotel's water pressure. One couple even reported that the water was coming out black and had a bad taste. According to the hotel's manager, when Lam first checked in, she was staying in a hostel-style room with other travelers, but later was moved to her own private room due to complaints from her roommates about odd behavior. The last time she was seen was on surveillance footage on the hotel's elevator. The footage showed Lam acting strange and peculiar, almost like she was hiding. She also moved her hands in strange ways, and it looked like she was talking to someone who was out of the security camera's view. After her body and the surveillance footage were found, it was suggested she was on some sort of hallucinogenic drug. Even though Lam took 4 different medications for her bipolar disorder, toxicology studies reported that there were no traces of any drugs or alcohol that could have contributed to her death. There was also a theory that she was murdered and died as a result of drowning, but the autopsy report showed no evidence of trauma. To this day, no one knows how she was able to access the roof or climb into the water tank and shut the 20-pound lid by herself. 6. Jack the Ripper. In 1888, in foggy dark streets of the East End of London, better known as the Whitechapel district, lived a serial killer that would go down in history as Jack the Ripper. Even though the Whitechapel district was known for its violence and crime, the string of murders conducted by Jack the Ripper would terrorize the public like no one had seen before. He was described as a madman with no clear motive. Even though his most famous murders only included 5 women, known as the Canonical Five, many theories suggest that he claimed the lives of up to 11 women. All of the victims of the Canonical Five were prostitutes, as it was common for women who lived in the Whitechapel district to take on as a means to survive. All 5 killings took place within a mile of each other from August 7 to September 10, 1888. Several other murders occurring around that time period have also been investigated as the work of Leather Apron, another nickname given to the murderer. A number of letters were allegedly sent by the killer to the London Metropolitan Police Service, often known as Scotland Yard, taunting officers about his gruesome activities and speculating on murders to come. The name, Jack the Ripper, originates from a letter, which is famously known now as the From Hell letter, that was published at the time of the attacks. Despite countless investigations claiming definitive evidence of the brutal killer's identity, their true name and motive are still unknown. 7. The Zodiac Killer. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, a serial killer known as the Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California. There were at least 5 victims, but later on, the murderer would claim he killed at least 37 people in total. On December 20, 1968, on Lake Herman Road in Vallejo, 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen were shot and killed while sitting in a parked car in a gravel parking area. By the time police arrived, Betty was found dead, but David was still alive. Unfortunately, he would die on the way to the hospital. This was the first murder that the Zodiac Killer conducted and got away with. The Zodiac's next crime would happen on July 4, 1969, in Blue Rock Springs Park, only a few minutes away from the previous crime. The Zodiac Killer approached a parked car with a flashlight and then murdered 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael Mageau. Both were still alive when found, but only Mageau would survive. He was able to describe the shooter as a young, white male, 26 to 30 years old, a stocky build, 200 pounds or larger, about 5 feet 8 with light brown curly hair and a large face. Within an hour, the police received a phone call from someone who claimed to be the shooter and the shooter in the Lake Herman Road murders. On August 1, 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Herald all received a handwritten letter from someone who claimed to be the shooter. The letters revealed specific details about the killings to prove that the writer was indeed the murderer. All the letters were signed with a circle with a cross through it, the symbol that would eventually be known as the mark of the Zodiac Killer. Also included in the letter were 3 different codes that the Zodiac Killer demanded be printed in newspapers or else he would kill again. The Zodiac Killer said that the cracked codes would reveal his identity. On August 4, 1969, another letter was received that started with the phrase saying, "This is the Zodiac speaking," marking the first time the killer referred to himself as the Zodiac. On August 8, the code was cracked by a couple in Salinas, California. The codes read, "I like killing because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill. Something gives me the most thrilling experience, it is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise and those I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for the afterlife." After claiming 3 more lives and causing nationwide terror, the Zodiac Killer wrote his final letter on January 29, 1974, concluding the letter with a new score, Me equals 37 SFPDE equals 0. The true identity of the killer has never been found. 8. The case of JonBenét Ramsey. On December 26, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado, Patsy Ramsey claimed to have discovered a ransom note for her 6-year-old daughter JonBenét Ramsey on the back staircase inside the Ramsey home. This prompted her to call the police at 5:52 a.m. to report JonBenét as missing. The only people inside the house were John Ramsey, her father, Patsy, her mother, and her brother Burke. Oddly enough, JonBenét's body was found inside the home in the utility room in the basement less than 8 hours later. The body was found by John and duct tape was found across her mouth and a smooth cord around her neck. When police arrived, it was suspected that the crime scene was heavily compromised due to multiple people arriving at the scene. The police had also claimed that they had not searched the house after Patsy's initial call because there was no reason to believe that JonBenét was in the house. At the time of her death, JonBenét was known as a child beauty queen superstar, having won at least 5 high-end child beauty competitions. Her death was ultimately ruled a homicide. The autopsy stated that JonBenét's official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. Due to JonBenét's beauty queen popularity and her mother being a former beauty queen, the case caused nationwide and media interest. Today, the crime is still unsolved and remains an open investigation with the Boulder Police Department. 9. Chicago Tylenol murders. On September 29, 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area ingested poison Tylenol pills, consequently collapsing and dying shortly after. The victims included 12-year-old Mary Kellerman, 27-year-old Mary Reiner, 31-year-old Mary McFarland, 35-year-old Paula Prince, 27-year-old Adam Janis, 25-year-old Stanley Janis, and 19-year-old Teresa Janis. Adam Janis ingested a Tylenol and died at the hospital. When the family came back to mourn, Stanley Janis and his wife Teresa took a Tylenol and died, making it 3 deaths in the same family on the same day. However, this tragedy is what led investigators to connect the dots. Cook County investigator, Nick Pichos, compared the Janis Tylenol bottle to Mary Kellerman's and noticed they had one similarity, a control number, MC2880. Deputy medical examiner, Edmund Donahue asked Pichos to smell the bottles and Pichos replied that they both smelled like almonds. The poison cyanide is known to smell like bitter almonds which, in large amounts, can cause seizures, cardiac arrest, and respiratory failure. The blood tests on all of the victims showed that they had taken a dose 1,000 times the lethal amount. Donahue spoke to an attorney from Johnson & Johnson, Tylenol's parent company, and after all the victims were buried on October 1, 1982, that the Tylenol bottles were intentionally poisoned with potassium cyanide. Immediately, over 31 million bottles of Tylenol were recalled by the manufacturer and were issued warnings. They also offered to replace recalled bottles with new bottles and offered a $100,000 reward to anyone who may have any information on the perpetrator. These precautions cost the company over $100 million. There were several more copycat deaths across the United States after the initial incident had occurred. This led to the invention of safety seals that you see on medicine bottles today. To this day, no suspect has ever been charged or convicted of the poisonings. 10. The unsolved Hinterkaifeck murders. On the evening of March 31, 1922, on Hinterkaifeck farm in Bavaria, Germany, 6 residents were murdered with a pickaxe. The victims included husband and wife, Andreas and Casilia Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's children, Casilia and Joseph, and the family's maid Maria Baumgardner. 2-year-old Joseph was killed in his crib and Maria was killed in her bed, while the rest of the family was then murdered in the barn and stacked on top of each other. Upon the discovery, authorities concluded that the murderer actually lived on the farm for 6 days after they committed the crime. Even after the family had died, cattle were still being fed, meals were being eaten in the kitchen, neighbors reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney, and the family dog was tied up to a post when the mailman came on Saturday. The bodies were discovered the next day. What makes this crime even more chilling was that Maria was actually hired the same day she was killed, replacing the previous maid who had quit 6 months earlier due to the house being haunted. She reported to the family hearing footsteps in the attic and voices. Around the time the previous maid had quit, the Gruber family had also begun to hear voices from the attic. Andreas had also noticed a set of house keys had gone missing, an unfamiliar newspaper in the house that he had never seen before, plus scratches on the family's toolshed like someone had tried to pick the lock. He had also reported seeing a pair of unfamiliar footsteps leading from the woods toward the back entrance of the family's home. Despite repeated arrests, no murderer has ever been found and the files were closed in 1955 and the house was demolished.